Good morning. 1 Kings 18 presents the fascinating true story of the faithful prophet Elijah. He has asked the wicked king of Israel, Ahab, to convene the nation. He's also asked that the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah to join them. Once convened, Elijah is going to present a challenge to the false prophets, and he'll direct his attention to those who serve Baal. Now, since both gods were created by the Canaanites, Elijah knows that they're not real, but many people of God do not. And since the king is not only tolerating them, but promoting them, the people are following his lead and adding Baal and Asherah to their worship practices. God is grieved over their deception. He had already told his chosen people not to worship other gods, not because he's insecure or unthreatened, but because, Psalm 96:5, all the gods of the nations are idols. They aren't real, so for his people to give their hearts and attention to worshiping them, well, that's not acceptable. God has sent his prophets to rebuke and correct the king and queen and the nation. But instead of receiving correction, they've chosen to kill God's prophets to silence them. So God is intervening through his prophet Elijah, who's not been killed. As the nation is assembled there on Mount Carmel, Elijah issues the challenge. The prophets of Baal are to call upon him to consume a sacrifice presented to him. Elijah makes it clear that they can't use any trickery as they've done before. When Elijah presents his challenge, the people respond with enthusiasm. It is well spoken, as in, that's a good idea. We're not informed how the 450 prophets respond, but they're likely nervous knowing that the entire nation is watching. Elijah invites the prophets to go first, and they have all day to try and get a response from Baal. And man, do they go at it. At first it's prayers, then it's dancing, then it's shouting, and then it's cutting. They cut themselves so significantly that the blood flows from their bodies. I mean, imagine that sight. The nation watching them cut themselves, watching the blood spurt out, wondering if that really is what Baal wants from them. We assume they're seeking his attention, proving their sincerity or worth by what they're willing to do in these moments. They try so hard. Surely that will convince the great Baal to show himself. But the scriptures record this, verse 29, there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. Well, now the people are suspect about Baal, something they should have been all along. I suspect the prophets are exhausted and disappointed. Things die down just as it is nearing the time for the evening offering to be presented to the Lord, Israel's covenant God. We learned that the altar on that mount had been so neglected and in disrepair that it wasn't even usable. And yeah, it's a picture of their sinful lives, having neglected the Lord their God and following the false gods. So Elijah takes the time to rebuild the altar. He makes statements about their covenant history to remind them of the commitment they had made to their God. He places the sacrifice on the altar, and then he wants to dispel any doubts about what is about to happen. Douse the altar with water. Douse it again. Douse it yet again. Well, now the wood is soaked. There's no way for a fire to be lit and a sacrifice to be offered. Or is there? I'm sure the people are watching with rapt attention as the prophet Elijah prays. Verse 36, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." And God's purpose for exposing the folly of following false gods that don't exist are fulfilled. God's purpose for revealing Himself to His people is fulfilled. And God's purpose in drawing the hearts of His people back to Himself is fulfilled. They bow in worship. They renew their devotion to Him as their God. They will worship Him. Let us do the same. God bless you.
Oh, worship the King, all glorious above, and gratefully sing His wonderful love. Our shield and defender, the Ancient of Days, pavilioned in splendor and girded with praise. Oh, tell of His might, oh, sing of His grace, whose robe is the light, whose canopy space. His chariots of wrath the deep thunder clouds form, and dark is His path on the wings of the storm. Frail children of dust, and feeble as frail, in Thee do we trust, nor find Thee to fail. Thy mercies, how tender, how firm to the end, our Maker, Defender, Redeemer, and